Okay, I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Urbana City Council to order. And if the clerk would please call the roll.
Ms. Barnes?
Here?
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Present.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Ms. Stevenson? She's not on?
Not yet. We're
Okay.
working on it.
All right. Mayor Pressing?
Thank you. Our next agenda item is, are there any additions to tonight's agenda from anyone? Charlie?
The mayor asked that we add an item on the intervention in the matter of the Southwest Mass Transit District case to our agenda.
And it's actually on there, item 12.
Oh, okay.
So
Back page.
we were able to,
I-
we were able to get
yes.
that on before the deadline.
Okay, got it, sorry.
Thank you, though. If there's nothing else, is there a staff report at this time? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
I would make that motion.
Second.
Okay, it's been motioned by Mr. Roberts and seconded by Mr. Smythe. And all those in favor of approving the minutes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, they're approved. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
I would make that motion.
Second.
Okay, it's been motioned by Mr. Roberts and seconded by Mr. Smythe. And all those in favor of approving the minutes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, they're approved. Now's the time for public input, and I can take all yellow slips over here. We have one in my hand right now, Mr. Todd Salen. If you would want to step up to the microphone, and I take it you would like to speak now before the agenda items. Right, and the microphone's right there in the middle. And before you speak, if you would please identify yourself and give your address, and please limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
No problem. My name is Todd Salen. I live at 1222 Lancaster in Champaign. I represent Ramshaw Real Estate in Champaign, and I'm here to talk to you tonight a little bit about the projects going on Philo Road and the exciting news that there are many major national companies that are in the process of looking at that corridor as a place to develop. The breaking ground of the Meijer store has allowed many local national retailers and offices to take a serious look at that as a potential for growth. In fact, we had a developer in from Indianapolis and from Florida in last week who are building owners down there and are in the process of making some major changes at Sunnycrest Mall and trying to attract a major national operation. A representative of that national company was in Urbana last week and met and reviewed the site and is very interested. The developers in particular have a concern that they wanted me to share with you, and that is this is the time over the next 12 to 18 months, this is the time when major companies are going to come in and look at our city. And their expectation is that they're going to see a corridor that is open and vibrant and displays as much charm and personality as downtown Urbana. When we met with Councilwoman Barnes and had this discussion, we needed to know that, in particular, that things like landscaping and streetscaping and any incentives that were there to draw national companies were on the table that we could talk about. So I bring to you a request from several national companies, as well as 6 national companies, in fact, that are specifically looking at Urbana as a place to develop, and developers with money and incentive to come in here and build and locate, that they have an interest in your corridor. When Meijer opens its doors, thousands of people will go up and down that street, maybe for the first time. And we want to attract them to Urbana so that they come and shop and spend and enjoy their time there. And I think all of you will agree right now that Philo Road has a character or a look that is less than what is the standard for the rest of the city that you've so carefully designed. So I asked you to put it on your agenda to carefully look at it and to make some decisions that will allow me to do my job, which is attracting these companies, and allow you, I think, to do your job, which is to bring new business, opportunities, and jobs to the community.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Todd?
Todd, before you run off, I think one, and I think I do speak for the council, that beautification on there is something we've been discussing, we're committed to doing. We just need to figure out what the best thing to do along there is. One time we talked about taking the downtown streetscape type, put it there. Public Works has brought us another design, a little bit different. We've played with some things. I guess it would be helpful if we got some input from the existing businesses along there and from you in this case and others that you might represent about what people would want along there. One of the big things might be to take some of the work that's being done at Meyer and bring it northward. And they're doing sort of I think a prairie theme, which is what I've heard Lynn talk about as well. I like that idea myself. So what ideas have you gotten, and what do you think we should be? What do you think we should do there? What specific things and ideas would be helpful?
What was echoed in the meetings that we had last week is that the city has done such a remarkable job downtown with the light poles, with the streetscaping, with the landscaping that you've incorporated into those blocks, that it would be wonderful. Why create something new? I know Meyer's going to do what they do, but Meyer is unique and special in what they are anyway. And now you wrap into the golf course, new housing, new development that's in that area. It kind of is going to exist on its own in my mind. You're close enough to the downtown that we capture the beauty that you've put right down here on right down Main Street and bring it out there. Why not let Urbana be Urbana all the way out to that border, so that people know when they're shopping in that district it's not an imitation of some Chicago suburb, but it is indeed Urbana with its character and quality.
Well, that would be sort of in keeping with what's happening at 5 Points, because they were going to take and use the downtown theme there as well, and we're supposed to take it down Broadway. So, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Yeah, Todd, I would just mention one other thing. We'll be discussing tonight a list of about 8 ideas of different possibilities. Our Public Works folks have already worked up some possible next steps and price tags, actually in a list of completed things that's already like $1.6 million of work that's been done on Philo Road on the city right-of-way so far. But we want to consider what of these 8 steps will be the next ones. I encourage you to look on the city website where you can see that memo. It's pretty short. It's a 2-page thing. If you could look at that list, and by next week, if this item comes to the council meeting next week, next Monday, send us ideas of which of these 8 items are the ones that to you would have the most bang for the buck and would make the most difference to people considering the corridor. That'd be great. I
would be happy to, and I will share those with my clients as well.
Wonderful.
Our company has taken the apartment buildings that are immediately to the west of Sunnycrest and are in $1 million plus development to bring that up to a standard that is good for the city of Urbana. And so we are very interested from a personal standpoint in making sure that the rest of the area around the block equals what we
and it's
develop.
looking so nice there. Those properties, the Florida Avenue, is really improved. It's been noticed, yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much, Todd. Next is Diane Marlin, and I think you'd like to address us now. And so again, Diane, if you would go ahead and be seated and let us know your name, address, and limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
Okay. I'm Diane Marlin. I live at 2203 Boudreaux Circle, and I'm also a co-coordinator of the Southeast Urbana Neighborhood Association. And I would like to second the applause for the gentleman who just spoke. The apartments are looking really, really great along Florida Avenue. I'm here tonight to also urge the council to invest in the beautification of the Philo Road Business Corridor now. It needs it desperately. To say it lacks charm is pretty kind. It just is horrible looking, actually. With all the new development in the area, it's now time to really make this place shine, and invest as much time and energy in that part of town as you've put into other parts of town, like downtown Urbana and West and East Urbana, for that matter. I looked at the list of ideas that the Public Works Department is considering. I would say anything that'll tone down the appearance of those vast expanses of parking lots would be great. Make it a less linear feel with the new Walgreens coming out toward the street. That'll be good. But those even the plantings are just linear. If you could soften the appearance, make more curves, expand some of those into maybe into a park, a fountain, a piece of art, that would be great. Do everything you can to promote pedestrian transport up and down that corridor, as well as bike transportation. I really think you need to improve the lighting in Sunnycrest Mall area, especially in front of the restaurants like First Lock and Margaritas. It's pretty dark there at night. And even though we need to conserve energy, I think there would be ways to make it brighter and more appealing to people. And the same thing goes for the facade of Sunnycrest Mall. It screams 1970, so it really, really, really needs to be updated, and it would be good to work with the business owners there. And again, one of the most important things is to keep it litter and trash free, and I'd like to applaud Lynn Barnes' efforts to promote that with her Don't Mess with Urbana pickup campaign. For the third year in a row, we helped pick up litter in the Sunnycrest area, in an area bounded by Florida, Philo, Colorado, and Cottage Grove. And 2 years ago, the first year we did it, we collected almost 50 bags of trash and litter in really a very small area. And this year it was, closer to a dozen. So there's a significant improvement in terms of how people are keeping the area up, and the businesses as well as the residents. So that's a good job, and it would be nice not to collect any litter there because I hate picking up trash. So we're making a lot of progress in that area. And I just think it's a tremendous opportunity. There's a lot going on there, and I urge you to put some money into this area. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Teresa Michelson, you want to come forward now? And again, just state your name and address, and thank you.
Good evening. I'm Teresa Michelson. I live at 2013 Silver Court West in Urbana. Have been a resident for over 25 years of the Philo Road area, and am here to urge, I'm also co-coordinator of the Southeast Urbana Neighborhood Association, here to urge the council to put some money, a considerable amount of money, into beautification of Philo Road. When you think about it, the downtown, which looks lovely, is not really a commercial area particularly. There's a lot of law offices and some little shops down there that people go into for the niceties, I guess you would say. But Philo Road is where people, except for the grocery store Schnucks, Philo Road is the place where people would be buying groceries, and there's a hair salon and a video store. Family Video actually has added a lot to that area. Their beautification when they put that store in was certainly top-notch. I think there's two areas that you need to look at, and I would not be in favor necessarily of redoing what's been done in downtown Urbana, because you have sidewalks and you have a lot of pretty plantings, but I certainly agree with Diane, the issue of hardtop, blacktop, the more that can be reduced. We had a chance to look at the plans for Meyer when we had a neighborhood meeting about 2 Wednesdays ago. We had 90 people come out for that meeting. And the Meyer plans, if you've seen them, include a berm effect so that you are looking, there's the lovely sidewalks that Urbana has put in, the bikeway. You're looking at berm before you look at this expanse of asphalt. And Libby Tyler was talking about the fact that this is a new look for their store. If you think of the Meyer out at North Prospect, there's nothing but asphalt out there. And so their idea with this new store, it's greenery, it's sort of the prairie look, then there's going to be some outlots, out stores, and then the store. I would like to see that kind of look continued, and that would take some money to be involved in the landscaping, because if you look at the new apartments that are going in where the Kmart was, right now when I look at it, the apartments look great, but I see a lot of asphalt there when I look at that. And the same thing in front of the current Sunnycrest area, although when Walgreens moves out, that'll be great, because they do beautiful landscaping in front of every store that I have seen recently. Then the other area you really need to look at, I think when people talk about Philo, somehow we maybe only think between Colorado and Florida. The real ugly area right now is between Colorado and Silver. That's very ugly, except for the there's a funeral home on the other side there. We know that Carl is going to leave that building area. There's an empty building next to it now that is just terrible looking. Someone's remodeling it, and enough said. So what's going to happen to that there? And then the IGA is back again, away from the road, gigantic parking lot again. So I would just urge you to look at something that would be maybe in line with the Meijer. It's well enough to say Meijer does what Meijer does, but this is a major company with a lot of money, a lot of people that work for them, and they put a lot of thought into this. So I would not be so quick to just disregard what they're thinking. I would like to see something that is more in that mode of lots of greenery is what you see first before you look at all of those parking spaces. And we need to make sure that there's somebody out there picking up the litter so that it continues to look lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, question. Just a second, Teresa.
Teresa, yeah, and this sort of applies to Diane Marlin's comment as well, is that we can control the right-of-way, and we can try to work with the owners, but we can't force them to do stuff.
Well, there, one of the, let's see.
Incentives, yes.
Yeah, there's the incentive, and I've talked to an apartment owner along there who, was complaining about new businesses, getting that kind of help in different parts of the city. And I don't know what that would cost, but maybe a shared cost would be more of an incentive for business owners to jump on board.
Okay. Thank you very much. Linda Lopez. Go ahead and let us know your name again and your address.
Linda Lopez, 2102 Meadowlark Court in Urbana. And the first word I heard tonight was the word corridor. And I've driven through many corridors up in the Chicago area, and I'd like to be different. And I think even if we look at the need for support in companies, stores on Philo Road, we need to protect neighborhood access and neighborhood conservation. And I say that because my home, amongst others, is off of the area just behind the IGA, down Mumford and over. So I don't want to look at the situation where we're all stoplights, traffic lights, and other things. I'd like us to really be inviting, and in being inviting, whereas we already have a bike path out there, can we do more to encourage stores to continue to put out bike racks? Make it an area perhaps where we could do shopping on foot and do so safely. Just to encourage the use of that bike path, walking path, and also look at our landscaping. When I in fact went out and picked up rubbish along with Lynn and many others, we talked about the fact that grass was already in front of some of the properties. There were plantings in, but the property owners did not necessarily know how to maintain or care to maintain. One thought that came to my mind, simply because I look at intergenerational things, is we have students here in town from the high school, junior high, who are forever looking for a fundraiser. They're out there washing cars and doing other things. Whether they come back through the city or go directly to the owner of the property, perhaps we could encourage many generations to take part in beautifying along with the dollars. And simply that pride might help us to have less rubbish thrown in that area. And then obviously we're going to need lights for safety. If we can do anything about keeping the lights shining down and still keep our stars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the input for now. We've got one input for later at the time of the item. So Charlie, you had a comment or question?
I just want to remind everybody that due to the July 4th holiday next week, there will not be a council meeting on Monday. And for those who have not heard, the fire department is pleased to, and the chief isn't here, the fire department is pleased to announce the arrival of its newest engine, a state-of-the-art pumper truck up at the North Station, with the same number, number 23. I don't know whether it's had its first fire this past weekend or not, but it's out and about. So,
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, let's go on to our ordinances and discussion. First one is ordinance number 2007-06-063, an ordinance amending the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. We'll hear from Mr. Gray.
Thank you. The memo today talks about 3 changes that the Bicycle Ped Advisory Commission would like to make. Very briefly, there is wanting to modify the number of commission members to 11. Secondly, establish their terms as noted in 3 years, that they'd be staggered in their terms, so not all 11 would be completing their term at the same time. And then lastly, identifying reasons for removal of members appointed to the commission. I don't know if Councilmember Bowersox would like to elaborate, but these were the main gist of fine-tuning the commission. They've been in existence now for 1 year, and these were some observations and some needs that we felt in order to continue onward.
Yeah, I just had one comment to add, that the version of the ordinance that went out in your packets actually said that there would be 9 members, but in subsequent discussion, I met with the mayor and talked to people last week. I realized that I had been miscounting, and Jennifer Selby reminded me late last week that I had forgot to count for myself and her, who would be members of the commission. So the number in your packet was listed as 9, but we would, as Bill said, like the number to actually be 11 members. So if, when we send this to council, if we could include in the motion, just that we would ask staff to bring a version with the number actually as 11 in the fine print, that would let us continue the commission and not have to kick 2 people off or unappoint 2 people for next year. Thanks.
Okay. Is there a motion to entertain, Charlie?
quick question for Bill. The way I read this is that the engineering department would have a member of Urbana Public Works would have a voting representative. How does that work when you also have a staff member sort of assigned to that, or would that person be one and the same?
It would be one of the same. It would be a similar setup to our Urbana Traffic Commission, where we have a senior civil engineer staff member that's a member, voting member, and a staff member that supports that commission.
Any other questions or comments?
I'd move to send this to council with 11-member request and a recommendation for approval.
It's been moved by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor of moving this to council, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It's passed. Our next item, number 6, ordinance number 2007-06-054, an ordinance amending Schedule H of Section 2393 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code requiring stop signs at a certain intersection, Skyline Drive at Airport Road. Mr. Gray.
Thank you. Speaking of the Traffic Commission, this particular item is Skyline Drive is a street in a new subdivision. Homes have been built and are beginning to be occupied, and actually this street connects to the subdivision, the Landis subdivision to the west. So this is currently a T intersection with Airport Road being an arterial street, so we recommend that there be a one-way stop for the northbound traffic.
Charlie?
Move that we send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
I second that.
There's been a motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor of moving this forward to council indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This motion will be moved forward. Item number 7, ordinance number 2007-06-055, an ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-183 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets, and this is in regard to Illinois Street east of Cottage Grove.
We're, again, the Traffic Commission met to discuss Illinois Street is a fairly narrow street. It's a chip and seal road, and where it intersects with Cottage Grove, there's been more parking in this area than had been in the past, and it makes for tight quarters and somewhat of fairly busy area, and so to help with safety and keeping the street clear at the intersection, there's recommendation here to prohibit parking on the south side for 90 feet from the center line.
Dennis?
I move that this ordinance number 2007-06-055 be sent to council with approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Charlie, moved by Dennis. All
I've
those-
got one comment.
Okay.
And Bill, this is an uncurbed corner too, isn't that right? Yeah. Okay.
Anything else? Okay, all those in favor of moving this forward to council, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes. It's going to council. Item number 8, ordinance number 2007-06-059, an ordinance approving a text amendment to the zoning ordinance of the City of Urbana, Illinois, adding Section 8-5, Neighborhood Conservation Districts, to the Urbana zoning ordinance. And Robert, will you begin? Now, I do want to mention we have 2 people that would like to speak, but would you like to first give a brief presentation, or shall we hear them first? Council? Let's hear our, Robert, okay.
All right, this is a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance called Neighborhood Conservation Districts. And in a nutshell, this would set up a process by which property owners or neighborhood groups could make an application to the city to designate certain neighborhoods or areas, at least 25, minimum 25 properties, for various kinds of protections. And the protections could include things like design review for new construction. I believe it could probably include demolition review if it were historic preservation based. It could include parking standards possibly, or other sorts of changes that the neighborhood itself feels is important. The way this is different is that rather than being imposed from the top down, this is sort of a grassroots effort. It's an application that would be coming from the neighborhoods itself and property owners itself. And this would be kind of at the property owner initiative, essentially. The process would be that the city would receive an application, and this is described in greater detail in the staff report. The city would receive an application either by 15% of the minimum of 15% of the property owners in the district, or by the neighborhood group. And if it meets the minimum standards, then the neighborhood will go back with city staff and work as long as it took to put together a neighborhood plan, and probably in most cases design guidelines. And with that, come back to the Plan Commission for review. There would also be a property owner notification and a registered preference card that would be sent out to all property owners in the proposed district. And what we're recommending in this ordinance is that at least 60% of those responding, of the property owners responding, be in favor of the ordinance in order to go forward. And then it would go to the city council for final either approval or denial of the ordinance. So for most districts, I think it would probably include, if it were adopted, it would include a designated ordinance which provides for the area, as well as a plan and probably design guidelines for most districts. There conceivably could be a district that would not include design guidelines, and we try to clarify that in the proposed ordinance. There are a few people who feel like that they would, including one person in particular who's envisioning a neighborhood conservation district in a certain area. He wants to talk to his neighbors about enacting this, but he doesn't want any sort of design guidelines. So I think that's conceivable. I don't know exactly what it would do, but we've tried to be very open-minded in this, as long as it's, obviously as long as it's legal and it meets the needs of what we're trying to achieve. Now, I want to stress here that this ordinance would not enact any particular neighborhood conservation district. Again, it's just setting up the process for future applications to come forward. And it is true that right now, as it stands now, the city council could request, let's just say, design guidelines for any area of the city, and we could go through the process, the zoning process, go to the Plan Commission, make a recommendation to the City Council. That's true, we have that process currently. How this is different is, again, this would be a grassroots, kind of a bottom-up process, and we would be setting it out in advance so that it would be very transparent. It's set up to be fair, and so everyone knows what's expected of them as applications would come forward. I think that's the real benefit of this process. We've spent a lot of time reviewing this, talking about this in the past in general terms, and then also a specific ordinance that the Plan Commission has reviewed, and also the Historic Preservation Commission. In the end, there were enough alternatives, I think, of alternative minds in terms of what people would like to see this ordinance accomplish, that the Plan Commission was not able to come up with a recommendation in favor. In fact, there were 4 or 5 motions put forward, and none of them could get a majority vote. So in the end, the Plan Commission did recommend for denial of the ordinance as currently written. Since that time, we've decided, since it's really city staff who's the applicant in this case, decided rather than just withdrawing this case, we felt like it still had merit, and we'd like to incorporate as much as we could from the Plan Commission and from the neighborhood groups that really took part, which included especially Huna and the West Urbana neighborhood. We tried to incorporate as much as we could all of those final comments in the current ordinance. And if you look on page 2 of your memo, we've outlined what changes have been made since the Plan Commission has reviewed this. The last point I'd like to make is that at your last City Council meeting, you requested that we be sure and let neighborhoods know about this through listservs, which we have made sure to do, including Huna's had, the Huna board has had a copy of it. WUNA, I know, sent it on their listserv. We also asked UCAN and SUNA, and both of them said that they would be doing so. And really, with that, I want to take any questions, but I also especially am eager to hear any reports from neighborhood groups. I asked Tyler Fitch, actually the Plan Commission at their last meeting on Thursday talked about having a representative here, as you all have requested, to kind of discuss what the thoughts of the Plan Commission were. And Tyler Fitch had volunteered to come and explain the thinking of the Plan Commission.
Great. Mr. Fitch, you want to come and address the council and the public? Go ahead and indicate your address, if you would.
Sure. I'm Tyler Fitch at 503 East California Avenue. As Robert said, was asked by the Plan Commission to come and just answer questions and sort of talk about the way the discussion went and what was the purpose of our voting to not to approve the ordinance in the shape it was in when it left us, but with some points of consensus and some other things that we agreed to. I also want to point out that I am active in HUNA. Tonight I'm a Plan Commissioner and neutral as to the ordinance as it sits before you now. As Robert said, there was no consensus really. It was very difficult to get any kind of a motion approved. And so finally, I think the path that we took was to vote not to approve the ordinance as it sat before us, rather than having it go through continued rounds between staff and the Plan Commission, but to talk about, to send it with a message that was 3-part. First of all, that the Commission believes that the concerns and intent of neighborhood conservation are important and need to be achieved. Second, it wasn't clear to many Plan Commissioners that NCDs were the appropriate tool to achieve many of the objectives of neighborhood preservation. And we can elaborate on that, as you have questions. And then the third were, within the many discussions, I think 5 points of consensus emerged that if there were an NCD ordinance, that the Plan Commission agreed that it should contain these 5 components. Citizens initiative, with some percentage, which then requires a city-assisted plan. It was, I believe, I was looking through the minutes again, and I'm not sure that it is fully reflected in the minutes, but I believe the discussion was that that plan could include not only a call for an NCD, but also zoning changes, infrastructure changes, park improvements, a litany of items. Then regarding a neighborhood conservation district, it would have to include design review and design guidelines. These would not be permissive, it would be mandatory. And then the idea of a protest petition was another point of consensus. We agreed it should be part of the process. And then the last item is to basically adopt a historic preservation process, but with the Plan Commission as the sort of main advisory board. But that would mean, in terms of this ordinance as it now sits, essentially dropping the final referendum to 60% of responders. So it would just be initiation of 25%. Plan Commission consideration, a city-assisted plan, Plan Commission consideration, then a protest petition possibly, which then would require you to either have a 2/3 majority or not, and then once the council had acted, the process would be completed. So that was the message that we sent along with the vote to reject the ordinance.
Any questions for Mr. Fitch? Brandon?
To me, I think all 5 of those things you mentioned are reflected in some of the updates to the ordinance since Plan Commission addressed some of the concerns Plan Commissioners had. Is that the way?
The ordinance is closer to, I think, the tenor of the discussion. It is closer to the recommendations. The 2 areas where it deviates the most are, I think, on the plan. The idea that the first step is for the city to help a neighborhood come up with a comprehensive plan to address could address a litany of issues, including calling for a neighborhood conservation district. The second thing I think is the 60% referendum, which now sits between Plan Commission action and council action, and it's 60% of responders to a city mailing. Those are the 2 places where I think it deviates somewhat from the Plan Commission's consensus.
Charlie and then Dennis.
Yeah, Tyler, that was the same sort of question I had. I guess I don't follow why the Plan Commission would want to skip over a chance for the public to weigh in on this in some measured way when in fact, a conservation district could be fairly rigorous.
Yes, it could be. And in fact, I think in the original version when this first came over, it was almost so much like a historic preservation district, or could be perceived that way, that it had to go to the Historic Preservation Commission and be ruled not eligible to be an historic preservation district. I think 2 things there. One is that when we voted on the ordinance, it was a petition signed by 60% of property owners. So at that time, it was my feeling, and there was also testimony that would be the bar was way too high. That it would be extremely difficult for any kind of a neighborhood, even an organized neighborhood association, to collect 60% of property owners' signatures. So it was viewed as setting up an impossible standard, more difficult than what historic preservation requires, an historic preservation district. So the idea was the citizen input, there's still an initiative, there's still a chance to protest, but bring it back down to what a historic preservation district requires.
Any other questions? Oh, Dennis, I'm sorry.
There were a couple items or thoughts that I had about the ordinance as it stands and has been brought to us. And I appreciate the fact that it's mutated since the Planning Commission put input into it. And I guess really in a way it brings up a lot of different thoughts, and I guess maybe I'll address a few of them. But to go back to the what might be called, it's called the preferential vote or the registration of preference. Basically, this is the time when the plan has been seen by the commission, and then an outline of the plan, the details of the plan are sent to all the property owners as it stands now, and it's then expected that they will be responding and sending their thoughts, either improving the conservation district or disapproving, back to the city. I'm not sure if it's going to come to the city clerk or the planning commission. Maybe I don't remember how that works out. And it is now 60% of those responding, which does seem at least to address a little bit the concern of the how difficult it would be to get 60% of anybody to do anything in this town, much less adopt registrations or some kind of covenants for a neighborhood area. So now it is 60% of the responding to these letters, people who actually send their petitions back. Do you think that 60% is still a wall to climb, no matter how many people have either answered their mail or not?
Well, I said I was going to be neutral on the language, but 60% is more than 50%. So it's a significant,
it's a 10% higher step.
That's
to
right.
take.
I do not know. It would depend on neighborhood by neighborhood almost whether 60% is, and there has to be some kind of a standard.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to go with the secondary, the registered preferences. So whether it's too high or not depends on the character kind of the neighborhood and whether it's appropriate given the mix of single-family housing, multifamily housing, owner-occupied housing, and things of this nature. You're not dealing with a regular population, right? One of the things in here is that when it comes to registered preferences, everybody gets as many votes as they have parcels in an area. So if a landowner owns 25% of the parcels in the area, they get 25% of the votes. So in that case, 60% might be really difficult to achieve if the one person throws in 25%. So those are the considerations I would throw out as you're considering what percentage to make it.
Was that the discussion in the Planning Commission why they weren't interested in having the registered preference forms sent out? I mean, they didn't. Your testimony was that they weren't really supporting that aspect of the plan. They were willing to bypass that and have the plan be forwarded to City Council for either approval or denial. Is that correct?
Yes, technically the consensus point was follow the Historic Preservation Commission process. So that would mean that the 60% would have been out. At that time, it was property owners' signatures on a petition, but technically, if you follow the Historic Preservation Commission process, there is no second referendum or second petition requirement. It's just 25%, I think, to initiate, 40% to oppose. Is that correct? And then commission advice and council action.
And so public participation would be basically focused around discussion of the plan. In this case, it would be at the Planning Commission stage.
It would be at the initiation stage, the chance to voice, opposition with the petition, and then through meetings. Whether they be meetings with city staff to
create the plan
specifically. That's right, or here or Plan Commission. That's correct.
Because there is that step too. Okay, I had a few other questions, and maybe they're going to be for Adam.
Any other questions from Mr. Fitch?
Yes, I have a question.
Danielle?
Thanks. Mr. Fitch, at the beginning of your presentation, and I appreciate you coming out for another meeting to talk to us tonight.
No problem.
Excuse me. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned kind of in summary that the Plan Commission saw the problems, but didn't necessarily feel like this was the right tool for the job. Do you have a sense of, I read through the minutes, but I don't necessarily get the spirit of the conversation through the minutes. of what kinds of tools would do the job? Do you have some comments on that?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And there were a couple of commissioners who, really pressed this point, that the argument, I think, is sort of twofold. Number one is the idea that many of the problems that people expressed were of concern, multifamily housing, poor condition of rental properties, and things of that nature, would be best addressed through zoning, through the rental registration program, through infrastructure improvements or whatever. So that's one. And by the time you get to an NCD type of a design review ordinance, it won't do anything about multifamily housing except for make the units look better, perhaps. But it's still, if there was a problem of historic homes being taken over in an R5 or something like that, and an apartment building put up, that could still happen under an NCD. So that was one thing. The other points that were pressed were that several people stated that they thought this didn't give citizens the power to do anything they couldn't already do. In other words, I could come here to the public input and lobby for, or say this would be a great idea. You could try to get a council person to introduce an MOR type zoning designation for a given area that would have design review. There was a question, what does this give citizens the power to do that they can't already do? And that's the way it was put.
Robert?
Well, I kind of agree with the fact that it seems as if with the zoning, infrastructure improvements, and all those areas that you have to work with as a body, there's little, you got all the tools. They can lobby the city council to do whatever. This is just another layer of, I think, of process that has little or no value to the general public. Everything that comes before us could come from the general public. They could lobby for, doing something about a specific building, a specific site, and I'm sure staff would take that into consideration. If we saw that zoning was a critical issue at that point, that would go into consideration, possibly making a change. I don't see where it would benefit either party except exacerbate work and possibly increase frustration on the part of the general public.
Any other comments from Mr. Fitch before? Thank you very much.
Knock me in the head.
Do we go ahead and do we have any questions for Mr. Fitch? Thank you very much for coming here tonight. We
All
do
right, thank you.
appreciate it. Okay, we'll continue our discussion. And Mr. Smythe, we have one more person. I'm sorry. Mr. Chris Storr, please come forward and state your name and address.
Thank you. My name is Chris Storr. I live at 405 East High Street, and I represent the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association. I would like to say that I briefly read, I've been away and had briefly read the text amendment to the zoning ordinance that's under discussion, and unfortunately, we haven't had a regular meeting of the neighborhood organization to discuss it among ourselves. And I'd certainly like an opportunity for the organization to do that, I hope, before council takes goes too far in their action. But if you would indulge me, something that Mr. Lewis said, I'd certainly like to address about the Neighborhood Conservation District, at least from the standpoint of our organization. As I think I understand what some of the neighbors, how they see this. While it's true that there are ordinances and zoning that cover a great many of things, the reason why we've promoted the Neighborhood Conservation District concept is because these have kind of failed to help in our particular neighborhood, where we've had a circumstance of what we call wear down, tear down. Landowner, parcel owner will allow a property to deteriorate, we think, with the intention of coming in with a, say, an apartment house that can be constructed to the very limit that the ordinance allows. This results in frequently architecture that's really fairly incompatible with the owner-occupied residences that have been a standard of our neighborhood. It's kind of caused problems with parking, because although the ordinances allow so many parking places per bedroom, we've seen these regularly exceeded. Just right over here across the street, the apartment house regularly fills up part of the church parking lot during the week, and yet another apartment house is under construction next to it. I wonder where those cars are going to park. We're going to have another church over there to provide parking. We see these as practical problems where the ordinances and zoning as they exist fail. And we hope that the Neighborhood Conservation District can help alleviate some of these problems and preserve the residential, owner-occupied, low-crime neighborhood that we enjoy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dorff. Are there any questions for Chris? Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, let's continue our discussion. Charlie.
Well, I'd like to point out that we've gotten some very, very thoughtful email from a number of people. Liz Cardman, Cynthia Hoyle, Betsy Cronin, and Diana Vizik. And I'll make sure that the clerk gets those. I think that thinking needs to be included. Has everybody seen all four of those emails? Okay, I'll make sure we get copies circulated. I would also agree that we should take our time with this ordinance, mull it over, get some feedback. I guess I did have a question for you, and that was, how soon will your neighborhood organization provide us with some feedback? Let's see, we'll be meeting again as committee in 2 weeks. Is that soon enough, or too soon, or?
We meet monthly, Charlie, and I can certainly try to put together a meeting in the next 2 weeks, but as you know, we have a holiday coming.
Right, yeah, throws our schedule too.
I wonder if maybe, perhaps later in July?
Late July, yeah. Problem is that's when others go on vacation too, so. Okay, well, let's just see how it goes. But I would think that we probably want to take our time and consider some of the different aspects of this. I guess the thing I most want to think about, and I think I support this in general, the piece that I'm having the most trouble with is the 60% aspect. Do we do it like the Preservation Commission or preservation process, or do we do it as described here? It may be the flip side of the same coin, 60-40. You have 40% protest versus 60% saying we want to do this. Another way to think about it is 60% says it's 15 houses out of 25 or 15 properties out of 25, and that seems to be a pretty solid majority. It's not a super majority, but it's a good majority. I think in answer to Robert's comment, and I think this is the way I look at it, is that and this was said to us by somebody, a member of the public, not too long ago, maybe last week, I can't remember, is that this is yet another tool in the planning and preservation and process. And basically, by putting something down on paper like this, we give legs to the process. It gives the public, who may not know how or what to do, a mechanism to go about maybe achieving something that they want and they and their neighbors want in this case. I can make a tool from scratch, or I can go to the store and buy it. It's probably much easier to go to the store and buy the tool for the job rather than to try to create something from scratch. And so I support this as a tool. It's not the end-all, be-all. It won't solve all the problems, but it's yet another piece of the preservation thing that we've been putting together. We've done gravel parking lots. We've done the rental registration ordinance. We've got to do some zoning changes in the historic East Urbana neighborhood. I mean, I think that's an important part. We did changes to the Busey corridor, almost, more than 15 years ago. We established the MOR, and bits and pieces of that are incorporated into this, and I think we're learning from that process, and I think everything that we do moves us forward. That's not to say, though, that there might be some situations where we need to do, as the Plan Commission says, and impose a neighborhood conservation district from the top down, as with the MOR. And I think that was a sentiment exchange in some of the emails that I saw as well, that in some of these neighborhoods which are heavily rental, that if we do want to save them, we may need to actually impose minimum design guidelines in there. And I know that that's something we are considering for the Busey Finger, for example, where if we do want to control the destiny of that neighborhood, we need to take action as a Plan Commission and a council. Thank you.
Brandon?
Yeah, I have a few questions. First, I guess briefly in response to Robert's comment and the other comment about why can't people just come and lobby us to make a change rather than us having to enact this whole process for it. To me, I think the process says that our door is open, says that we're open for business, and that if you come here with 25 of your neighbors, we're going to take the time to get you a city-assisted plan for your neighborhood, to make a list of what we're going to do to help you, and to enact a district that adds some specific zoning that helps you conserve your neighborhood. And so, yeah, we don't have to do that formally. We could just tell everybody that, informally get together with 25 neighbors and come and ask for what you need. But I think to officially say that we're open for business in that way is really helpful, and that we're committed to doing a plan for every neighborhood or group of 25 neighbors that wants one. I have a few questions, Robert Myers, for you. First, about the scope of the city-assisted plan. Tyler Fitch had mentioned it wasn't clear whether the plan could include parking lots and lighting and parks and other things that are maybe beyond the scope of our zoning ordinance. Can the city-assisted plan include all those things, and is there maybe a change in wording so that we can say, yes, the plan will include all sorts of neighborhood requests and ideas for neighborhood improvements, some of which would become part of the district, others of which would become other things the city might take action on?
Yes. Yeah, the plan can recommend other changes that might need to be made or other provisions that might need to be adopted in addition to design review. I suspect design review would be the most common element of the most common tool adopted as a result of the plan, but the plan might say, we need to have alternative parking requirements for this particular area, for instance, whether private or on street. I'm just thinking out loud.
And can it even include things completely beyond things in the city's control? Like, we want more grocery shopping and more daily needs of pharmacy. If neighbors say that they want that, I think it's fair to record that in their plan, even though that's not something we'll make an ordinance and declare that there's going to be a pharmacy at this corner. That's not the way pharmacies come to town. But can we include broader things like that so that it's a way of capturing all of the neighborhood's desires?
A plan can include land use, and much of the time it does. The critical elements for most neighborhood plans are land use and housing, community facilities, and transportation.
Okay.
So those are the typical elements for a neighborhood plan. It would probably have to be in abbreviated form. It's probably not going to be it may not end up being, I'm envisioning it as, may not be a full-blown, very detailed neighborhood plan. but it would be a plan that can be used in order to recommend what tools are necessary in order to meet those needs for the neighborhood.
Okay.
Excuse me, could I ask Robert to speak closer into the microphone and just
Sure.
repeat those 4 points that you said about what makes up a neighborhood plan?
The 4 points about what? I'm sorry.
What makes up a neighborhood plan?
What makes up a typical neighborhood plan? Yeah, what makes up a typical neighborhood plan are, the elements are housing, land use, community facilities, and transportation. Those are the typical elements for a neighborhood plan.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dennis, and then,
No, I wasn't.
go ahead,
if that's
Brandon.
okay. Okay, sorry. I'll get my whole list done here and try to be brief. About the 60%, Robert, I wanted to just ask you, for historic preservation districts, is the number lower than 60%, or it's just that it takes 40% of people to come and register a protest?
There's not a property owner requirement for historic preservation districts. What we do have, though, is if the application for a landmark, for instance, is made by other than the property owner, and the property owner, they have a registered preference form, if they turn that in against designation, then there's a 2/3 requirement for city council approval. So it is different in this case. The neighborhood conservation districts, sorry, I'll try to speak into the microphone. Neighborhood conservation districts that we've looked at around the country, most tend to have a property owner requirement of some sort to ensure that there's a minimum level of buy-in for property owners. And that's important for various reasons, including enforcement later on. Make sure that generally speaking, that most of the property owners agree with the designation.
Okay, and I guess I agree with Charlie that if a different method of doing this suits people more, I would support that. But yeah, there has to be some real show that a majority of the 25 or more people who come to make a district really want it. I mean, the district has to stick and has to have neighbor support to really work. But if another method works better, and if people feel like, the trouble is it's hard to get neighbors to respond if it happens during the summer or something, then I'd support some different method. My last question is about the demolition. You mentioned demolition review, but I don't think I even saw the words demolition review in the particular ordinance that we would enact. Maybe I missed something, but if you could describe how you think the demolition component would fit with these districts.
Sure. We provided a staff memo last fall about demolition review, and in that memo, we discussed the legality and also recommendation for demolition review. And in our research, we felt very strongly, well, first of all, we felt like in order to be legally defensible, that demolition review would need to be historic preservation based. That there needs to be some sort of historic preservation basis. In other words, that there's something intrinsic about this building or property that says that that it's significant on its own. If there's nothing intrinsically important about that particular property, we didn't find a really rational basis for saying you can't demolish that particular property in order to build something else. In other words, just because you don't like the replacement doesn't mean that you can't tear down what's there currently unless there's something intrinsic about the property that's there currently. So with that, in the staff memo last fall, we did not recommend in favor for demolition review citywide. I think if you take it on a smaller area basis and it is historic preservation based, I can see a demolition review for a smaller area as part of a neighborhood conservation district that's following a plan, for instance, that identifies the historic significance or historic character of that particular area. It needs to be protected, and maybe it doesn't qualify for full historic landmark status or full historic district status, but there's still something intrinsic about it that's historically significant. In fact, most neighborhood conservation districts in most communities are used as kind of a light form of historic preservation, if you want to call it that. I mean, Some people have called it historic preservation light. We've tried to avoid that here because people see it a lot more broadly than that. Some people feel like that neighborhood conservation districts could very well and may very well be used where there's no historic preservation whatsoever, historic preservation basis whatsoever. And that's a possibility, for certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I think these districts, I think that's good. I'm glad to hear that you think historic preservation reviews or demolition reviews for historic significance could be part of these districts. That's good. I'm glad to hear it, and I encourage that. I also think we're not going to really save the historic stock of Urbana one little district at a time. If 25 neighbors get together and form a district, and we get a few of them in town, that's not going to really save the heritage of homes, especially the houses that have been around for more than 100 years and things. I think the kind of process you talked about, demolition review that's broader and citywide and based on some process for reviewing when old homes are under consideration for demolition, is something that we should just enact on a broader scale. I don't think this tool is really going to save a lot of our historic stock. So the demolition review is something I think we should move forward with separate from this, as well as, like Charlie said, the downzoning in historic East Urbana and the design review in the Lincoln-Busey corridor. Those are all pieces that were already part of the prior neighborhood conservation report that have been sort of on the table for the last year, and I think they need to be back on the table, and we need to move ahead with them regardless of these particular NCDs that might form. Thanks.
Dennis?
I feel like I want to lasso the horse that just ran into a box canyon. Not that most of the things that we were just talking about aren't pertinent to deciding as the City Council. And, of course, the issue of what we'd like to see happen through the enactment of some of the a potential conservation district, of course, would include many of these comments or many of these issues. But the ordinance that we're looking at, remember, it was presented at the very beginning. It does not enact any particular action in itself. These choices made by different groups, neighborhood associations, or community members are what are defined for a particular plan that later on will come before the Planning Commission. This ordinance merely establishes the open door that Brandon very eloquently mentioned that allows citizens to know that if they have concerns within their neighborhood, they can there's a process for addressing them. And it doesn't require historic review to answer some of the questions that might be in a neighborhood. They might. It might be somewhat of a historic preservation question, but very often, maybe not at all. It was a significant part of the development of this ordinance that all references to historic preservation were removed, that a new section was created in the ordinance laws of the city and a new section number given to this particular plan that is separate from others. So, and also what has been removed from this ordinance is any reference to the date of a home or a neighborhood and how old a neighborhood has to be to enact such a plan. And so indeed, a neighborhood that is 15 years old could adopt a neighborhood conservation ordinance, and the sole reason might be to address certain drainage problems within the neighborhood, or to create guidelines about where or where not certain kinds of sheds might be built in the backyard or side yard of a home, or side yard parking or some other such issue that comes up to the attention of the community. Now, that being said, there's really no limitation to the kind of direction an NCD might take. And many of the NCDs will indeed address questions that also pertain to preservation of a neighborhood, but they may address them in different ways. And it may not be specifically in the guise or the vocabulary of historic preservation. It might have to do a lot more with zoning and preference of infill construction, which of course the East Urbana neighborhood has put a lot of attention on. So I just wanted, I guess in that first comment was that I really wanted to extract this ordinance from all of the possible considerations of what might it become when people actually begin to use it. Because I think we'll be lost in what ifs. But really what we're trying to look at here is whether this tool is useful to us. Now it was, Robert, you had a concern that anybody could address any commission and begin initiating a certain process to create an effect in their community. But I have witnessed the fact that it's very difficult to try to piecemeal a view or a general concept of what you'd like to have accomplished in a neighborhood if you have to go to 3 different commissions to achieve it. And in some of them, you will be asked some pretty difficult questions about, well, why are you trying to change the zoning in this district? Or you might hear that this zoning is preferred and we like to keep it this way. If you hear this kind of comments, you don't have anywhere to go. But if you are creating an NCD, you are, at least you're given a valid voice for your concerns that might be addressed with more seriousness. And your wishes for change in certain areas may have a greater validity. So I think that there is a place, and I don't think we really know how useful this tool will ultimately become. But I do think it's worth putting on the books, and then we'll have to sit back and see how people use it. And they may use it in a variety of ways. The part that I like is that the plan comes from the community. It's presented to us through the commissions. There's weigh-in historically and through planning. And there is a certain amount of participation by property owners in the validity, making it valid. Now, I personally would rather see that the plan receive, if it's going to require a buy-in vote through the mail process and return flyers with a preference recorded, that would just be basically 51%, i.e. for presidential election, all you need is 50%. You get the majority and the thing is accepted. I think 60%, even of those responding, is pretty steep. And I'm wondering if we might find that some plans will be killed for lack of 3% of a vote that have a good intention. And once a plan is defeated, it really can't be presented again before the Planning Commission, because I think it says in here that they're not willing to hear a plan of similar constitution come before them, until like a couple years pass. So you kind of like the vote part of it is the part that really kind of concerns me. And to hear that the Planning Commission was willing to do away with the mail-in vote entirely, I think we really have to decide if that's a useful thing. Comment, can we trust that process or not? In any respect, whatever process this initiates, it's got to be stronger and more fair to the general community than if the city council just decides that it's worried about a certain area of town and decides to enact an ordinance or dictate down to the neighborhood, the Busey Finger or whatever you may wish to use an example, Clark Park, that we care about this certain issue, we've made up our minds, and now we're imposing these restrictions. And, for city planning, that's valid, but also city planning is about listening to the citizens and allowing them a fair share of input into it. Now, the one thing that I noticed that was a kind of a diffusion of focus for this topic was the mixing up, in my mind, of the creation of this ordinance to create a district versus the creation of a neighborhood plan. A neighborhood plan was created in the Huna neighborhood by the Huna neighbors because it was suggested in the comprehensive plan that neighborhood associations could do such, and that any neighborhood group can get together, talk about their goals and aspirations, their concerns, and list the things that they like to see, the improvements in their neighborhood, and create basically a neighborhood plan and present it to the city council, as Huna did. And now the council doesn't adopt the plan, but it accepts it as advisory, basically. Now the same process is just now occurring in the Crystal Lake Park neighborhood. And the city actually initiated this process, allowing the people who live in that neighborhood to get together, and they sat down with a map of their neighborhood area, and they began putting colored dots on the map and writing in things that they'd like to see happen in that neighborhood. So that is a wonderful way that the city is encouraging the creation of a second neighborhood plan in our community. Now, SUNA has not established a neighborhood plan, and to my knowledge, WUNA created a white paper, but WUNA doesn't actually have a neighborhood plan, to my knowledge. They haven't submitted what I would call a neighborhood plan to the city. So we have an opportunity to encourage neighborhood planning through the comprehensive plan process. But let's separate that process from this tool, which is to create a district within a neighborhood, not the entire neighborhood perhaps, but a district within a neighborhood of at least 25 properties that have a special issue which they'd like to have addressed. And again, maybe the basic issue would be zoning and infill construction design guidelines. So I just wanted to say these things to kind of clarify this particular ordinance and what it's trying to achieve versus all the possibilities that might come from adopting this ordinance, and also the importance of neighborhoods having plans to give themselves voices.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and hear from another individual from our audience, Ilona Matasti. Thank you, and you can pronounce your name probably much better than me. But please come, state your name and your address.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Ilona Motkowski. I live at 412 West Elm, West Urbana. Sorry for my late presentation. I just came in from Chicago, so I may repeat something that has been said, or some of the stuff may be irrelevant at this point, but I could not be here earlier, but I would like to say a few things.
And please try to limit your comments to about
Yes.
5 minutes. Thank
Yes.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak more directly into the microphone, Ilona?
Yeah, if you want to pull that little black triangle
It's the
right
little
there.
mouse on the
Yeah,
face.
right there. Perfect.
Okay.
You're good.
Staff began working on the enabling ordinance for the neighborhood conservation districts last year, 2006 March, and the plan that they came up with, or the enabling ordinance staff came up with, has gone through several discussions by the Historic Preservation and the Plan Commission. And on May 10th of this year, the Plan Commission recommended denial of the enabling ordinance based on several points, and it was then forwarded to a recommendation to work on by city staff and discussion by the city council. So it has been more than a year since our work on this began, and I think at this point the plan, as I read through it, seems quite good. And I would like to recommend that the city council accept this plan. I think it's an extremely useful tool for residents of various neighborhoods who are very concerned about their neighborhoods, such as WUNA, HUNA, and perhaps other neighborhoods being destroyed by inappropriate development and landlords not caring for the buildings. This should definitely be a useful tool in protecting those neighborhoods. I would like to have I would like to point out a couple of things in here which may have been already pointed out. One is on page 8. Of the ordinance. It says signatures of 60% or more of owners of record responding in favor of designation shall be required. I think that this should read as signatures of 60% of the responding, 60% or more of the responding owners of record endorsing the designation. I think it's very ambiguous as it is worded, and it does not reflect what's being said on almost the last page of this. I don't know if that has been corrected or it has been pointed out.
Robert, do you see where she's referencing?
On page 8.4, signatures of 60% or more of owners of record responding in favor, and this does not reflect what it should. The signatures of 60% of the responding
Correct.
owners. I don't know if that has...
It's just unclear.
Yeah, it's a very ambiguous the way it is. Now, second, I would like to also suggest that percentage be reduced to 50% or maximum 51%. And as far as I know, for point 3, let's see, under G, let's see, point G, what? Point G, number 3 under point G. One of the recommendations by HUNA was that in the review, screening and landscaping will also be taken into account. I think that was a very good recommendation by HUNA. I don't know if anybody else has commented on this tonight, but I have noticed, especially in the Easter Bend neighborhood, some stockade-like fences going up recently, which basically totally cover the view of the buildings, so the whole yard looks like a wood stockade. I don't think that we want that repeated. In West Urbana, new buildings that have been put up on Green Street have plastic fences on them, shiny, many feet of shiny plastic fences surrounding the new buildings at Green and Kohler Crossing, both of the new buildings. I don't think that shiny plastic fences fit into the historic character of the neighborhood. I don't think they should be allowed. There are not gravel but cobble landscaping done in front of one of the building, and there is another building right across from our house where we have gravel front yard landscaping. I don't think we want that. I don't think they fit into the historic character of the neighborhoods. So I think that screening and landscaping should be included here in the review. I think it's very important. It's part of what makes these historic neighborhoods look like they do, look historic. Just very quickly, I would like to add that I consider this as the first step in conserving and preserving the character of our neighborhoods, and these have to be followed by additional steps, and 2 very important steps that should be also considered are demolition review is extremely important. Without it, things will, I'm afraid, keep going on, bad things that we don't want. And the other one is rezoning of neighborhoods that are zoned for apartment buildings today and are historic neighborhoods, old historic neighborhoods, without rezoning and demolition review. I think we're going to be constantly fighting an uphill battle just with this one tool. But this is a very good first step, and I would like to ask the City Council that it will be accepted.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? You have a question for Alana? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your information. You know, let's do a little kind of council check here. We've been discussing this for about 40 minutes or so. Is there a direction that we are feeling or sensing? Charlie, you first.
Yeah, I wanted to make one small, I want to throw out an idea and then suggest that after Dennis speaks, maybe we just send this to committee, or keep this in committee and bring it back in 2 weeks. That was my intent here.
And that would give time for the neighborhood district to...
Right, yeah. Let me throw out an idea. You know, the way this reads now, if there's a valid protest, it requires 2/3 vote of the council for approval. One thing we could, I know the percentage here is of interest. One way we could do it would say we could modify this a little bit along these lines. Say that if you do get 60% of the responders in favor, that it would simply require a simple majority vote of the council, and that anything less than that would require a 2/3, say. And you could drop you could simply drop the other percentage. In other words, 60% of responders, it goes to council, and basically a simple majority approves it. Anything less than that would require a 2/3 majority, basically as if it were protested. That's my idea.
Okay. Did you have a comment, Dennis?
That's good, Charlie. I just had some very specific things about wording, which I think I should present now because we can modify this in 2 weeks when we're discussing it. And I guess I'll just go to, I agree with the idea that in the proposed guidelines, which is G3 that Alona just brought up, that another section called G ought to be added, and that would be called screening and landscaping. But also in the initiating sentence of number 3, it reads, proposed design guidelines prescribing future development within the district, which may include the following elements. I think we ought to also list that they are not limited to the following elements, because one might feel that the ordinance only allows discussion on A through F, but nothing else. In the next section, further down, we're talking about K, Planning Commission recommendation. There's 1, 2, 3, number 3, number 4. It has to do with the 60% signature approval that comes back as it stands currently. And then the last sentence of number 4 reads, each parcel is considered independently regardless of single ownership or multiple parcels. The same concept is stated, and I thought maybe better, identically, in page 9, number 3. That's what I said here. Well, where it reads, there shall be one registered preference for each parcel within the proposed district. It's saying the same thing, but it says it more clearly, and I thought maybe that wording was stronger. I thought that was a thing with that. All right. And then at the end, final determination. We have 3 different paragraphs for N. And I thought that there might be some clarification about how the NCD actually comes after. So it might be worth saying something like this. Add a number 4 and a number 5. Number 4 could say something like, no less than 15 days after approval of an NCD ordinance by the City Council, all property owners shall be notified of the plan's adoption and directed to a means of receiving the final plan documents, either through publication, public posting, distribution, or web-page posting. In other words, after it's enacted, I think everybody in the district needs to have a copy of the final plan as approved. And then perhaps add number 5.
I'm doing this with my mic off. Sorry. And number 5, the plan shall take effect 30 days after its adoption. We don't really have a time where the plan actually begins after we adopt it, so I think we should say whether it's going to be immediate, 15 days, or 30 days after adoption.
Is there any general consensus about Dennis's ideas, or?
It should be an overall review of the language as well as the document itself with regard to the issues being raised. There's a number of concerns that I see. Based on my comments, I still say there's a great deal of ambiguity in what we're trying to do. But if there's a consensus that this is something that is going to be an integral tool for the neighborhoods, I think we need to give it great consideration in terms of what the language is, how it's said, what authority the community has when they come before us, and the longevity of such a tool, because it's going to be difficult with all the parameters that we've established to try and come up with a general consensus for this particular element to be a part of all the other components that are going on, such as zoning, conservation, historical preservation, all the interlacing that goes on. If this is going to be a component that the citizens will use to initiate, then we have to give it very critical consideration as to language and how it's communicated in the future.
Do I hear a motion or?
Sure. Do you want to?
No, go ahead, Dennis.
Well, I move that we retain this in committee and look at it again in 2 weeks, and ask that staff review the language of the document and include, perhaps expand or add some of the points which were brought up by the public and by the council to further establish this document.
Is there a second to that motion? There's been a motion, and it's been seconded by Mr. Smythe.
And could I speak to the motion?
Yes, Danielle?
Okay. I think what I'm hearing is that Dennis and Charlie and Brandon are generally comfortable with the overall picture of what we're doing. And I guess as we go into talking about this in 2 weeks, I want to register a couple of things. The first off is I think the litmus test for an ordinance is how well people understand it as we're about to vote on it. And in this case, I feel like even up to today, it seems like every person, every council member, every commissioner, every member of the public, people I've emailed, like planning experts who I've emailed, each kind of have a different picture as to what this neighborhood conservation district is going to do. I think it's a little bit problem with the language, not of the ordinance, but the actual phrase neighborhood conservation district. I feel like it's something you can't argue with. You know, of course we want to conserve our neighborhoods. So I think, for example, just the last planning commission minutes that I was reading, the chair, someone asked, well, would this prevent me from putting a porch on my house? And the planning commissioner said, no, it won't. But actually, it could prevent someone. If someone puts a porch on their house, it was brought up. There was a plan commissioner who said that she thought the design guidelines were an optional thing. I've asked people, is this going to prevent contemporary architecture? One person said yes, one person said no. Tonight, Dennis mentioned that it could solve drainage problems. I have no idea how a neighborhood conservation district could solve drainage problems, but I'm interested in I'm trying to understand what each person's perspective is. And also tonight, I thought that this was specifically for historic neighborhoods. Now I find out it's actually for new neighborhoods. So I kind of feel like what's happening is here's my concern. We're setting up this expectation that we're going to solve a list of problems. Dennis sent me, it was very helpful to hear back from a few folks. Dennis sent me a response, and he had a list of about 8 things that could be solved with neighborhood conservation districts, including things like street lighting and brick sidewalk construction, which I felt was actually a city issue, not a neighborhood. I mean, the city decides that. It's not a constraint on developers, for example. So honestly, I have to tell you, the whole thing is completely confusing to me, and I don't think I'm alone in this, because every single person I talk to, it tells me a different thing when they talk about what this means. So that's a big concern. I feel like we're getting into the minutia of the ordinance, and actually we haven't addressed the fact that the community is not on the same page in terms of what this means. I will say, after saying that, there's a couple of things, kind of suggestions as we move forward. The first is there's two things I really like about the concept of this neighborhood conservation district. The first is the community engagement aspect. I think the more people have a seat at the table, the more likely they'll be involved in overall planning processes, and I think more democracy is better. So I like the engagement. The second is that I like the idea of making certain areas distinctive, saying there's something distinctive about this area that, like a historic preservation district, would be something we'd want to say, but maybe wouldn't meet the threshold of historic preservation district. I don't really think, at this point, I feel like that piece is lost, but that's what I was thinking was going to happen. I actually suggest, having looked at all of this, I suggest a completely different option than moving forward with this ordinance, and then I'll also speak to, if we do move forward with the ordinance, some suggestions. The one thing I do hear from people that is clear consensus is we're trying to stop windowless boxes, we're trying to stop apartments on stilts. Why don't we just write that into the ordinance, that we don't allow people, unless they come in and ask for a variance, to build a house that has no windows that face the street? We wouldn't have to figure out if it's a neighborhood conservation or not. It wouldn't just apply to those neighborhoods that are totally mobilized. It would be for everyone. Same thing with stilts. If we want to get rid of apartments on stilts, let's just do that. I think we need to look at downzoning, especially in the Hewlett neighborhood. It's not addressed here. And I think demolition review and some of the things that were discussed to review houses for their historic merit before they're demolished, also not particularly in this. And Dennis did say something, and I appreciate the comment of saying, look, let's not get into the examples. This is just an enabling legislation. But honestly, if you enable legislation that sets up an expectation that this is going to solve every single kitchen sink problem, I think we're really setting ourselves up for people to be disappointed. Instead, I would prefer for CUNA, which has taken a key role in this, and I think should be taking a key role in this, to actually come to us with a proposal for what it is specifically, some changes they'd like to make, some design overlays. And let's look at that and kind of use that as an example so that we can begin to figure out what we mean when we talk about neighborhood conservation district. Okay, so if we do move forward with this, I have some pretty significant concerns with the ordinance as stated. First off, I want to make sure that any ordinance we pass encourages heterogeneity and variety. And I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on historic preservation and keeping things looking like they look now. A house that is built in 2007 is not going to be a Victorian house from the 18 and 1900s. It's just not. And if it's built to try to look like that, it's actually really against what I think we need to be doing, which is to promote progress in architecture, contemporary styles, innovation, etc. I'm so concerned that this will be a stuck-in-time kind of ordinance. The second is, I think we need to limit what design criteria can be used. I think that, people dictating paint colors and types of plants, these kinds of things, which it's totally an open book right now, I feel like those kinds of things need to be excluded. Now you will say, okay, it goes to the council, and therefore the council has some say. But when you have 60% of property owners saying they want something, I think council would be very hard-pressed to go against that. And I don't think that property owners at a particular historical moment should be fixing in time the aesthetics of a neighborhood. And so I think that the peer pressure for council to go with what 60% of the property owners say is too much. And so I actually think there needs to be limits. The last thing is I think that we can accomplish these goals while being less bureaucratic. I think this is, in some ways, consensus documents can end up being really a tangled web. And I see, Dennis mentioned one of the reasons to have this ordinance is because right now people have to go to 3 commissions. Well, this ordinance is going to 3 commissions: the Historic Preservation Commission, the Plan Commission, the Development Review Board, and necessarily commission. So I keep hearing things that just simply don't jive with what the ordinance says, such as that. So I think that we need to figure out how to pare this back. So those are my concerns at this point. I sent some emails out to council members. I'm very interested in hearing back. I'm not totally opposed to the idea of a neighborhood conservation district, but I'm very wary of the current situation that we're in, and I think we need to make sure that people are very clear, including ourselves, what we mean when we say neighborhood conservation district.
Okay, there's a motion on the table. It's been seconded. Is there further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion by Mr. Roberts and seconded by Mr. Smythe indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? The motion passes. So this will be seen in committee 3 weeks from tonight. Okay. All right, let's move on to ordinance number 2007-06-062, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance. And I believe our counsel, Ron, would you please take us?
I hope Ron Eldridge will be coming up here to assist me. The lion's share of the numbers that are before you this evening in terms of this budget amendment have to do with past and ongoing litigation. Primarily, some of the bigger numbers you'll see from the Insight Human Relations case. That is a case that is pending right now before the Human Relations Commission. It's ongoing. And these costs are primarily for, obviously, the legal counsel that was provided to or provided for the city vis-a-vis Donald Jackson, and Ms. Nally is the hearing officer that was appointed by the commission to oversee the case. You'll also see a large number in the amount of $56,584.95. There is some ongoing litigation regarding our billboard ordinance. And that's a case Fashion Adams billboard versus the city of Urbana, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. So that continues to march its way through the system, but we are diligently working on trying to whittle that litigation down to something that's makes it moot, or at least makes it manageable, and something that will not become a nightmare should it go to trial. Couple of the last really big one is the ICC Ameren rate case intervention. That's the $16,345.44. Also, one of the big numbers is the contract negotiation with IAFF, which continues now, is ongoing right now. Obviously, I don't need to sit here and read all of these numbers, but I just wanted to try to speak to some of these, and if there's some specific questions that I can answer, I'd be happy to do so.
Okay, Brandon, and then Dennis.
Yeah, okay, tonight I'm going to play the devil's advocate and ask a few hard questions. I guess I just want to understand, to me this is a pretty big budget amendment. It's 250% over the original line item, and I know it's just one line item in the whole budget, but I want to understand, I guess, which of the two departments, is it each individual department, like the legal department in this case, whose job it is to watch and identify as soon as we're going over in a line like this, or is it the comptroller who kind of helps watch? And at what point in this last fiscal year did we know it was going over? I know today we're a week before the end of the fiscal year. When did we know during this last year that we were going over by so much?
Well, I'll say that I knew I'd been alerted that we were going to be spending some numbers over what we had anticipated. However, we had $60,000 in all the line items. In the previous years, we'd been over a few $1,000s. Like last year, we was over 10, and the year before we were over 2. So you know, I thought that's the number we were probably going to come in at. And I didn't even see probably about 80,000 of these bills until just about like a month ago. The work was being done, and attorneys are kind of notorious for not billing very quickly. And, you know, a lot of this work has been going on for a long time, but they just recently got the bills to the city, so.
And to direct answer to your question, you know, it is my humble opinion that it is the legal department and the comptroller's job together to work to manage the budget. There is something that I want to point out to you, though, and that is that neither the comptroller nor the legal division can control the vicissitudes of litigation. It is very, very difficult to put a fixed number every year on litigation because you don't know when you're going to be sued. You don't know what the resolution of that suit will be. You don't know when you're going to be called to have certain costs associated with that litigation, be it some expert that you must retain to fill in some gaps in knowledge or to testify, whether it's going to be just particularly acrimonious litigation that cannot be resolved through negotiation. I feel a little bit uneasy speaking to some of these numbers because I can't give you the specific history because they predate me. Okay. However, I can say that, you know, I'm pretty familiar with most of the larger numbers here because obviously I've made myself aware of what's going on, and some of this is also something of a perfect storm that occurred. We had some big litigation costs associated with also the fact that there wasn't consistently legal counsel in the legal division, and that caused for us to, for some of these issues, have to go to outside counsel, which obviously is going to be more expensive than having your in-house counsel. For example, I would expect in future human relations cases that I, along with the human relations officer, Mr. Rent, would be handling those types of litigation costs, which wouldn't completely do away with that number. We'd still be inclined to probably have a hearing officer that would be private counsel, but I would probably be able to obviate the need to spend that kind of money on this type of litigation. Also, now that I'm on board as well as Kurt Borman, he is now handling city court. So that means that, for example, the almost $13,000 for the city court work would no longer be a necessity because either he would be handling that or I would be handling it. So there are things like that that can be controlled in the future, presuming that we have a consistent legal staff in place, and I think we're working towards that right now. But some of the things like the Adams billboard case, contract negotiations, I mean, that luckily that's only going to happen every 4 years or 3 years as the case may be. So those are with the FOP and the IAFF negotiations, those are not going to happen every year. Also, I hope that in the future we will be able to negotiate all those contracts in the same calendar year so that it would be a predictable cost that would be coming.
Okay, thanks. I would just say generally we have really tight fiscal control, and I love the way that we are so careful with money and so careful with not having debt and things. So this was a surprise, and I understand why. And obviously we got to pay our bills, and you know, lawyers don't work on a fixed bid. They just send you the bills when they do the hours, and so we're going to pay the bills. But in the future, I would just ask that rather than being surprised when we know there's changes like this, for us all to, and obviously you haven't even been here the whole year, but watch these, and when line items are so far off, let us know so that it doesn't feel so much like a surprise.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Dennis?
Okay, I just had of course, some of these, I guess, are going to terminate. Some of these ongoing expenses are going to terminate. Certainly the negotiation costs will come to close. The ongoing use of a lawyer with the Civilian Police Review Board, which we haven't really discussed for about 6 months now, I see, are we still being billed for some activity there? Is this past activity? Or?
There's Seyfarth and Shaw, I believe, is past activity, and Mr. Gitz, that's per an agreement that was signed a year or so ago, that he would continue the work because he had already advanced so far in the development of the Civilian Review Board. The only thing that's new there is Hervis and Condon, and that is a civil rights, an attorney that deals with civil rights defense of municipalities and governments, that we consulted to make sure that we were not violative of any or doing violence to anyone's civil rights, but at the same time protecting our police officers and making sure that the legislation that we are proposing would not put the city in a difficult position.
I have one more question. One item that's not on the list, which I imagine we do have some kind of obligation legally with consultation, is the Illinois Water possible acquisition.
You've already budgeted for that. It was an expense that we share with Champaign.
Yeah.
And that well will be running dry eventually, and I'm sure that if necessary, Champaign as well as Urbana will be approaching their respective legislators to see where we need to go with that.
Is there a motion?
And is it also true with the upcoming franchise discussions with the UPTV and the cable company?
Yes. My understanding is that there was previously money budgeted in sort of a joint.
So you're not
campaign.
tracking those monies in this account?
No, not as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Is there a motion? So moved by Mr. Lewis.
Second.
Second by Brandon. All those in favor indicate by saying
Aye.
Aye. Moving this forward. Thank you. Now we'll go on to ordinance number 2007-06-061, an ordinance amending Chapter 14 of the Code of Ordinance of the City of Urbana, Illinois, adding university-related organization and Class CA caterers retail liquor licenses to the schedule of fees.
I would just like to, I guess, request that an amendment be made on here. I was informed today that there's a Scrivener's error on the face of the fees. Specifically, I'm looking at Section 1A, 1P. The caterer's retail should read $1,145. The caterer's retail dash additional site will remain as $765.
So is there a motion regarding this with this alteration?
Yeah, I make a motion that we accept this ordinance with the corrected caterer's retail fee, Section 1A, 1P, being revised as indicated.
Okay, and that we move it to council.
Yeah, we move it to council. Yes.
Is there a second? Brandon, there's been a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, while we're talking about the liquor license fees, it's been brought to my attention that there's can be quite a discrepancy between our fees and those of Champagne's. And in fact, it can cost the same kind of bar 50% to twice as much to have a liquor license in Urbana as it does Champaign. Now, some might consider that a good thing. I think that's probably putting some of our small businesses at a disadvantage. So I would ask that as you put these numbers in, that we bring this back, that we bring up the topic I've just raised to committee at our next committee meeting with some numbers from staff about what the numbers really are in Champaign and what we might want to consider.
So right now, we're moving this to go forward?
Yeah, I have no problem with this moving
Okay.
forward, but I would like us to review our numbers and in comparison to Champaign. I think they should be more similar than dissimilar.
And we can make a change later.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd like to get staff to come back with that to committee.
Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor of moving this forward to council with approval, would you please indicate by saying aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, this moves to council. Let's go on now. We have a discussion item, the Philo Road Beautification Plan. And I believe Mr. Bill Gray, will you be presenting that? Okay, thank you.
Last fall, we were asked to look into the Philo Road corridor and try to come up with a list or a menu of ideas to help address beautification and identification needs and thoughts in the area. And we put our collective heads together and thought, as a little background, it would be important to acknowledge what has been recently completed in the last couple of years. No particular order. There has been a concerted effort by staff working with the businesses to keep the area a little more tidy with litter pickup and managing turf better. The Arbor Division had done some flower beds back in 2005 along with irrigation, and that work was done in the Parkway area between Colorado and Florida. We also installed some identifying signs in the right-of-way to help give the public ideas, direction as to where the business district is, especially for those not familiar with the area. And then last year, and final completion was this year, 2 large projects, street-type projects, the Colorado Avenue and Philo Road projects. And again, that was to complete sidewalks or bike paths where they did not exist, storm sewers, curb and gutter, street widening, striping, et cetera. And those projects have completed. From a street network standpoint, the area is very well suited for future growth and more growth, whether it be on foot, bike, or in a vehicle. But then we put our thoughts together as to what would be helpful in these areas of beautification or sense of identity, and we had come up with 8 ideas. There, again, no particular order. The numbers are very soft numbers, but maybe just an order of magnitude of, perhaps number 0 is what we're talking about here. But one would be, do we want to convert perhaps the stretch between Florida and Colorado into more of a 3-lane cross-section, similar to what we did on Lincoln Avenue? There would be some expenses more than just paint involved with something like that, but that's an idea where we could help with the crossings and perhaps even include bike lanes in that stretch. Secondly, professional help with banner design. The banners we did use were banners that were readily available. We haven't really budgeted for or come up with something more unique to help beautify or improve the look in that area. And the other thing is we could add banners literally all the way down to Windsor Road if we wanted to, just a matter of how extensive we want to get. And then secondly, do we want to add poles, decorative poles, or perhaps even augment with more lighting in the area? And that is to add more banners onto those poles, because the poles generally are on one side of the street, opposite the overhead power lines. Then we looked at perhaps there might be an opportunity for a mini park or some area partially in the right-of-way or within a private property where we could build an area for kind of a gathering place. Item number 4 we think has a lot of merit, and as we heard tonight, and quite frankly, this probably impressed me when I first moved here, is just the sea of asphalt that's out there, and concrete with the large parking lots on both sides of Philo, and the lack of planter areas, lack of trees. It's just a wide open expanse, and perhaps through an incentive program of some sort, details could be worked out. Could we cooperatively get adjacent property owners to soften that starkness of the asphalt and concrete that's there. Then number 5, there's probably more intense landscaping we could do in the Parkway area, maybe to the point, there's a variety of ideas, but almost to the point of maybe even almost no grass, but more of a rain gardening look, or just more intense vegetation, low to the ground type of thing. Not that we would be obscuring visibility for pedestrians and traffic, but again, depending on how much we want to get involved with expense. But that's something we could do to soften the area. And there's other thoughts of, with the help of a professional, maybe some other beautification or art opportunities in different areas. I like what the Pines has done with the bear and the acorn sculptured piece down there, and I think it'd be nice to, of course, not too far away is Meadowbrook Park with all the art pieces they have there, and maybe we can carry themes of some sort, but find locations on private or public land that we could add to that. And then the sidewalk, yes, we do have a pretty good we have a good sidewalk system through there now, but there's some things that we can maybe augment that a little bit to give it a certain flavor for Philo Road. And lastly, and this is kind of an ongoing thing, perhaps a more unified approach to the trash and litter and turf mowing and such is that maybe we just establish a special service area. This is an appropriate mechanism to use, and maybe take that day-to-day maybe headache for some out of their hands and contract perhaps with a firm, a company that does this professionally with the appropriate equipment for turf management and for trash removal, and have this done on a more intense basis. But obviously that takes a majority of businesses, property owners, to want to go ahead and do this sort of thing, but this is a mechanism to institute a litter and turf management. So there's probably a whole lot of other ideas out there. We're at a point where we really need direction. Where do you want us to concentrate on? If they could be prioritized as far as concentration, that'd be helpful to us. This is such a broad brush list. We didn't put anything in the budget because we didn't know whether to put $2,000 or $2 million or somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between.
Yeah. But anyway, I'll stop talking. But
Okay. Can I call on myself?
Poor Lynn is chomping at the bit.
Based on some recent meetings with some developers and real estate folks, the question that you asked to Todd, actually we discussed in great depth, actually. And the top things that this particular developer, and actually Todd, as a real estate representative, mentioned were lighting along the right-of-way, decorative lighting, plantings and landscaping of the right-of-way, an interest in having that maintained more consistently, and potentially through some kind of creative matching funds, to incent the other business owners to participate. Sidewalk repair. They mentioned that when they were out and about looking at Philo Road, that even though we do have a sidewalk through there, there's some humps in it, there's some cracks in it, it's more narrow, and they thought that widening the sidewalk and making the sidewalk or freshening it up would assist in bringing people to the area. They noted also garbage cans, park benches, areas for people to kind of sit along the right-of-way. And then again, just to kind of reiterate, the potential need for matching grants from the city, for all kinds of creative things, whether it be this special service area that you mentioned, it could be for facade work, it could be for signage improvement, because there's some signs along that area that just look very poor and they're in disrepair. So I think there'd be a lot of creative potential uses for matching grants where we kick in and we expect them to kick in, and that way we leverage our money and are able to get a bigger bang for the buck. So those were the things that they mentioned that they felt that would draw further interest and help to solidify some of the things that they've got cooking. Brandon.
Yeah, that's really great feedback. I have a few more of those sort of comments to add. One thing is when I drive down that corridor and look, one of the ugliest things besides the expanse of asphalt is the power lines that are on the east side of the road. And I was wondering, Bill, if one of the things you could add to the list was at least consideration of burying the power lines. I don't know how expensive that is, and maybe that's a huge project, but
That would be that $2 million number.
Okay, that's the $2 million number. That series of, 5 or 8 poles along the east side is just really visual blight, and it's hard, I think, to put decorative light poles and things in when that is there cluttering up the space. My second comment is about the light poles. Yes, I like number 2, and I think that lighting is important, and it has to be decorative. The tall 30 or 40 foot, down lighting that shines on the street just is not attractive at the pedestrian scale. I think the kind of downtown globes that are lower, that are decorative, and that shine on the sidewalk are the type that would add to it, not the kind that's there already that's so tall. Also, in the matching grant, I wanted to suggest that you consider adding to the list of things bike racks. That maybe the city, in developing a matching grant, I know one of the people here mentioned bike racks, that we could fund half if a business owner would go in on adding bike parking on their space. In general, my 3 favorites are numbers 1, 2, and 3. I think those are all really important to do. Those are the 3 that I would generally vote for, and I also think numbers 4 and number 8, they're tricky. They involve cost sharing and setting up special service areas and things. Those are things we have to study and talk more about the business owners with, but those would be, I think, valuable over time if we can put them in place. Thanks.
Robert, and then Charlie, and then Dennis.
Like number 4, when you get into the changing the topography, the land, and maybe we could use some prairie grass, and since it's part of the prairie here, in conjunction with a little bit of soil, and create some nice rolling forms out there that would take off a lot of this concrete thing. I think that would be a good one.
I think Charlie and then Dennis.
I'd like to suggest a mechanism by which to accomplish most of the stuff on this list. I think much of it is worth pursuing. It's hard to set the priorities, and I think it'd be easier if we started with the last item here, which is the paragraph below item number 8, which is professional landscape architect, streetscape consultant. It would be good to get an idea of what we want this to look like. And that person or company or whatever, be it our own staff with some help from outside consultants, would need to work with the landowners and the property managers all along there and the homeowners further down. But I think we need a vision of what it should look like, with this, and I like number 1 especially, as one would expect from me. The 3 lanes, that's a real attractive concept. We've heard that, I think, we've got the message from the real estate agents that this will go better if we do some X, Y, and Z here that you've mentioned, Lynn. But I think if we don't have a vision of what the design should look like for the whole thing, from Philo or from Florida all the way to Windsor Road, I don't think we can really put this all together. We know that we want to do these things, but what's the order, over how many years, what's the final design? I think that would help drive how we get these things accomplished.
Dennis, and then I'm Columbus.
Well, that's a good comment, Charlie. It would probably put the whole thing in a greater perspective, and it's really better to have a presentation of a concept, and then we can, evaluate it. It's true that we would like Ashley to achieve all of the goals listed by the Public Works Department, which I appreciate your having spent time on in evaluating. I know that some of them are more likely to be attainable sooner than others, and I tend to think number 1 is totally a good idea, the 3-lane highway. I've seen it work in other parts of the city. Urbana and Champaign, and it allows traffic to flow smoothly and allows left turn into businesses and neighborhood streets, so it's very efficient. I think landscaping the parking lots and breaking up the massing of the parking lots, number 4, is a really important one. And I think it goes without saying that landscaping along the parkway is a plus that we'd like to see more. When the Philo Road Business District was first established, and we just saw those little signs, they were so pathetic because they were, but it turns out that they were a great thing because they were like the little tiny seed that that initiated the whole change in consciousness for that area. It seemed way, underpowered, and yet it had an effect. And then the next thing that happened was the low impact landscaping. It shows that the city cares about the district. Probably, I was going to suggest that maybe we all submit, a list of our top 4 and see, who wins. It's just like we've done the grants that we just passed for the city social services. But really, it would make more sense to have a professional come in and help us.
I'd like to make a comment. I like Charlie's idea about having a vision, because then you show a vision to potential developers, to real estate people. I like that. But I think timing is of the essence. I don't think this is something that we can do and, we can have something kind of all planned and ready to go that we roll out over the next 5 years starting next year. I think we miss our window of opportunity. Right now, I think things are beginning to get a little hot. And I think if we can strike while the iron is hot, that we'll be more successful in getting some things done more quickly. So while I like that idea, I think timing is a little problem, and I think what developers want to see from us and real estate agents is a greater commitment to the area than what we've shown. I'm not saying that what we've done hasn't been good. It has, but I think we need to take that next step because it isn't really that visible when you walk down the street. So I think we have a bit of urgency here for something that our marketing folks can take and show and say, hey, this is what we're going to do in the next few months. So that's just my comment. Charlie?
I think we could probably put together an outline of what to do in the next couple weeks, next 2-3 weeks, and maybe identify some funding. I think it's clear that items 1 and 4 strike chord, plus the combinations out of here of the things that you say, lighting on the right-of-way, plantings and landscaping, sidewalk repair, park benches, trash. Those can all be worked in. I think we can outline a vision and start working on pieces of it, but at the same time, I think we do need to have an overall plan that we're aiming for. And maybe here's a suggested outline of the vision, that it include the 3-lane aspect, that it include prairie plantings that are consistent with the south end of the street, but we have street lighting and some sidewalk improvements that are consistent with the downtown theme, sort of blend the two aspects together, and that we commit X number of dollars this year, next year, and the following year. I think we need, it's going to, I know you want to get as much of this done now as you can, but fiscally we probably can't. But we can probably if we identify these are the components we'd like, here's how much they would cost, and if we budget it over 3 years, maybe we front load some of it, but we get started down the road. I'd support that, but I do want to have a little bit of a vision going forward. I have a vision in my head, but I don't know that sells to everybody else.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Is this Danielle? Oh, a new person.
But are they on council?
We're pretty open.
Yeah.
We have a person who would like to. Would it be okay if we hear Teresa from? She turned in a.
Yeah,
here?
go ahead.
Okay. Teresa, please come on up and address the council.
Teresa Michelson, live at 2013 Silver Court West. I would just like to reiterate what Charlie said. I think there are a few things here. I couldn't believe you can actually do this first thing for $50,000, that seems awfully cheap to me. I mean, and it's something that would, right away, somebody would know that you're starting to work on that. But I think you do need a plan, and I don't know how long that takes for that to go through a bidding process. Do you have to go through that sort of thing in order to get? The city can do that itself. And maybe not just one plan, maybe a few plans or something, that there would be something to choose from. But I definitely think if you're going to spend money, that's a super idea. Start some stuff that's visible and not super expensive, and then the plan with money committed. Well, for that, what you get, it seems not too bad.
Okay, I'm going to take my turn. I guess.
Okay, good.
All right. All right.
Sorry about that.
I guess I just had maybe on this list there might be two things I might question. First, maybe we need. Maybe I'd like to hear a discussion of the kind of street lighting that we're looking at. If we want to bring these ornamental and decorative street lights that we've used in the downtown area, and I guess we're extending them in other directions from the city center, including possibly on Broadway Street and in the future on University. So really that's our theme. So, okay, we'll go with that. The number 7, I think that down there in that area, strict, wide, good, solid sidewalks is efficient. And I remember in a conversation with you, Bill, you said that the decorative brick siding along the downtown area and around Lincoln Square was the most expensive you could ever possibly make a sidewalk cost. Well, had high upkeep, and it was great for the downtown, but maybe we shouldn't be throwing that everywhere we look. And it might be a way to conserve some money to not consider brick sidewalk accents in that corridor, but just to do some really good other things with the money. And I really would say landscaping in the parkway might be the most convenient, and it could be installed this summer potentially, because we still have a growing season of a couple months, and it might be something we could do immediately to impress potential visitors.
Brandon?
Yeah, let me make a suggestion. This is a discussion item, so we can't send anything to council, but I would suggest actually that we consider making a motion to ask our staff to, back at the next committee meeting, bring a slightly more concrete plan to tell us for $200,000 what roughly the scope of a consultant and work could be, and tell us a little bit about phasing that, whether it's your recommendation to fund it with the CIP or the ED Reserve Fund or the General Fund. But take a budget like that and the comments about what the priorities are, and to actually bring us a budget amendment and a sort of action list that could be sent along to council. That's the direction I'd like to go in, if other people feel like they support that.
I like that direction. I think, just to be clear, as a part of that, I would hope that budget amendment for this year would include more than just a consultant, but a piece of this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Something like $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be more than $20,000.
We're into next year's budget. I mean,
well,
right.
It's the same money.
Yeah.
It's the same money. It's the reserve funds of whatever's left over. So we're into the next budget.
Yeah, I think it depends
Okay.
on sort of
So-
on where staff and the mayor.
So, Brandon, is that a motion?
Yeah, I'd make that.
Okay, there's been a motion. It's been seconded. Is there further discussion on this particular motion? Dennis?
And maybe the city can sell Girl Scout cookies to help fund this. I agree. I think we need to have something set in motion before winter hits.
Okay. All those in favor of this motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Hearing no nays and all ayes, the motion passes. So we'll hear back from city staff at our next committee meeting, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the discussion. The last item on our agenda has to do with the mayor's request, and I believe you have a fresh memo on your desk from the mayor dated June 20th. And it's with regard to intervention in the matter of the Southwest Mass Transit District case. There's no one signed to talk about that, or Ron, are you kind of the mayor's?
Actually, that's why we have my esteemed colleague here, Special Counsel Jack Waller.
All right.
Who will speak on that matter.
All right, Mr. Waller.
Just let me briefly address why Urbana.
Yeah, it's on. Just got to get a little closer.
Let me try to briefly address why Urbana does have an important stake in this case. Actually, a very important governmental principle is involved in this case, and that is whether or not the community, and that's us in Champaign and Savoy, of course, whether the greater Champaign-Urbana community is best served by a fragmented transportation system, or are we better off with a transportation system that serves the entire urbanized area. As you know, Urbana is part of CUWATS, the organization that oversees transportation here in the county. And in year 2004, CUWATS, Urbana participating, established a goal in the long-range transportation plan that the CUMTD should attempt to become coterminous with the cities of Champaign and Urbana, and after becoming coterminous, to annex properties to the mass transit district, Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District, as each of the cities grow. In fact, shortly after that, Urbana and Champaign passed an intergovernmental agreement agreeing with the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District that we would ask them to do just that. Well, in, I think it was 2005, at any rate, the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District then embarked upon a program to make their boundaries coterminous with the two cities. And that is what prompted Mr. Tapley and others in extreme southwest Champaign to petition the court to have a referendum to form the Southwest Mass Transit District. And indeed, as you know, the referendum was held and the voters out there did approve it. The problem is that if the Southwest Mass Transit District is in fact a viable legal entity, and if they don't voluntarily dissolve at some point, they will permanently block the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District from ever serving the community, our urbanized community to the west of I-57. And that's what really is involved. In many ways, this is somewhat similar to the Big Grove case, if some of you remember that 4 or 5 years ago. And in that case, Champaign supported us, Urbana, in supporting an important governmental principle. So this is really, in a sense, the very same issue. Will the cities stand together and vote to try to preserve a unitary transportation system that serves the entire urbanized area? Be glad to try and answer your questions. It's a terribly interesting case, but I won't bore you with all the details.
Thank you, Jack. Charlie?
So, Jack, what steps do we need to take to add in our voice?
Merely this: direct the acting city attorney to file a petition to ask the court to intervene.
Okay.
I might say I don't think it'll cost us anything but a little staff time and a postage stamp.
Okay, and is that from committee or from council? That what level of direction do you need?
Probably should be the council.
Okay.
And July 9th is soon enough.
Okay.
Champaign has already filed their motion, or very close to filing their motion to intervene.
Okay.
Robert?
It's my understanding, that there's additional look at the transportation needs within Champaign-Urbana, Rantoul, surrounding areas. I was exposed to that with the Regional Planning Commission, and with different types of transportation needs, such as the elderly and that. What impact would this have on them?
Like serving Rantoul?
Serving Rantoul, serving Savoy. They were looking at the rural areas as a means of having a form of transportation that would allow them to be transported about, even in the rural areas. They're talking about expanding the transportation system to encompass the rural areas. And if that's done, how would this impact that expansion?
Well, I guess it depends on how this would be done to serve, for example, Rantoul. Rantoul, I suppose, could be served, but we'd need permission of the county to run outside of the established boundaries of the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District. In other words, the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District can perform any service within its own boundaries.
Sure.
But it can't go out of its boundaries without permission from the area that's going out of their boundary for. And of course, it takes some sort of a revenue-generating arrangement to induce the district to go to Rantoul, for example. So how would this affect the idea of the Mass Transit District serving Rantoul? I think the effect would be if somebody wanted to block that, and if they got up a sufficient petition, they could have another mass transit district just like the Southwest people are seeking to have. In other words, if people in Thomasboro decided to do the same thing, they could put a block in place to the north of Urbana.
Dennis?
I guess two questions. One, the fact that this new Southwest Transit District was established by a legal election. Is our interest in an injunction or an agreement with Champaign to question the results of that election on legal grounds?
Oh, yes. The election has been, well, let me put it this way. The Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District, it sought to intervene even before the election was held to try to point out to the court that there were certain defects in the petition. The court did not allow the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District to intervene, go ahead and order the election. Following the election, there were other irregularities, shall we say, that Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit contends. And so right now the posture of the matter is there's at least a question as to the legal viability of what came out of the election. It's still being contested.
If they indeed if it turns out that they have legal right to try to set up a transit system, of course, it's contrary to common sense to try to have two systems coexisting in one urban area. But would they have the right only to bus their citizens back and forth in their own Savoy area? In other words, they wouldn't have, or would they have the right to come into the main depot in Champaign to drop off and connect with people?
They would not, no.
They would not. So they would be limited to just circular routing in the Savoy area.
Right. It would be fragmenting the system, but of course they're on record as saying they don't want any transportation system. They formed it to keep transportation out of there.
So they could all walk. Okay, thank you.
Charlie?
Jack, where's the county on this?
The county, as far as I know, hasn't taken any position one way or the other.
Okay. Yeah, it strikes me that, if any part of the community needs mass transit, it's those in the most outlying areas who should be using them. So I would move to direct staff to bring us the appropriate motion to our next city council meeting.
Is there a second? Motion made by Mr. Smythe, seconded by Mr. Bowersox.
Yeah, supporting intervention by us.
Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of this indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing no opposed, the motion passes. We'll be seeing this back at council meeting 2 weeks from tonight. Okay. Having no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.